Hi everybody, hope you can excuse the wonky lighting here. I'm underneath my Rogers 825. We're going to take a look at how I put together my reverb system for this instrument. So I'm kind of cramped in underneath the organ and I got this one little light, but you'll be able to see what I did here, and that's the most important part. So on these older Rogers organs, there's any number of ways that you can set up reverb. The standard system that is built into this instrument as well is to have a spring reverb tank, and then there's a mono mix on the preamp board that is a send and return, basically just an effects loop. The problem with that is that, number one, spring reverb really doesn't sound that great on an organ. But, of course, in the 70s and 80s, it was pretty much a standard thing. Digital reverb sounds much better, but that effects loop that's pre-wired into the preamp board on the older Rogers analog organs is just too hot. It had to be way too hot on output to run the spring reverb. If you just plug in a digital reverb, even a guitar stomp box type, it's just too hot, you get nothing but distortion. Then I tried on one of my previous instruments to attenuate that output signal down enough to where it would work with a guitar stomp box reverb. But then, of course, it was a very noisy setup. Now on my 725, I had basically a 2-channel setup just on the internal audio, and then a separate subwoofer that I had rigged up and a separate reed speaker. So what I did there was pretty simple. I simply interrupted the line level output from the preamp board for the 2 channels that were going to the internal amplifier, and then created an effects loop that way. On this organ, we have a 4-channel audio system plus the subwoofer, and in my setup, it's going to end up being a 5-channel audio system. So getting reverb off of those separate channels is a little bit of a challenge. But there's a simpler way, and we tried it out on this instrument and it worked really good. I'm going to turn the camera here just a little bit. This is the headphone jack on this instrument. Let me bring that in a little closer for you. Okay. So this is the headphone jack. And basically, a standard headphone jack is the same amplification as a line level output. And of course, it is a stereo mix. So if I can tap into that, then I can have a separate output for my reverb. Now, of course, the problem is that the headphone jack on an organ is designed so that when you plug something into it, the organ automatically shuts off the main audio. And so I had to do a system where I would prevent it from doing that. So take the jack out. Now, depending on the instrument at hand, there's a switch here on the side of the headphone jack. And depending on the instrument, it'll be, a pair of like little reeds. And in this case, when you plug the jack in, it closes the switch, and then that tells the organ shut off the main audio. In other cases, it's a normal closed switch, and you plug in the jack, and then it opens the switch to tell the organ to turn off the main audio. Well, if it's that latter type where it's opening the switch, it's a normal closed switch, and it's open to shut down the main audio, then what you do is run a jumper wire between the 2 connector points on the switch. In this case, it was normal open, so when the jack is plugged in, it closes the switch and shuts down the main audio. So all I did was I slipped a piece of electrical tape in between the 2 tines and then wrapped it around, and now when the switch closes, it doesn't make contact, and so that gave me my line level output stereo mix for reverb. So then it's just a simple matter of plugging in a stereo cord, and off we go. Now I can still use this jack as a headphone jack because there are controls on the console that shut down the main audio. So if I did want to go ahead and put a headphone in here and play the organ that way, I could still do it, just shut the main audio off on the stop controls. So this cord is a stereo cord, and it's strapped underneath the key deck. I use these little hooks here that the cord goes through that round part, and then you drive a screw in, and then that holds up the cord. And then I ran the cord over to my house audio system where I have my other keyboard, and I can plug in to play the sound on a movie or a DVD or CD or off of YouTube or whatever. So let's go take a look at that setup. Okay, so here we have the equipment I'm using for the reverb. So the organ's sound is going through its own speaker system, and there's no artificial reverb mixed back into the organ's audio. Instead, we're running the reverb entirely on a separate speaker system, and in this case it's just the regular house stereo system. So those of you who are astute about vintage equipment, yes, this is an old Radio Shack equalizer, and it has the typical, if you remember the tape deck hookups, the tape monitor hookup, and then you would hook that on your receiver, and then to keep a tape deck or two in the line you had a couple of switches for additional tape monitor hookups. Well, you can hook it up straight. In this case I have my digital piano hooked to the main input, and then there's two more inputs that I can use switchable. Number two is for just a line cord that I have where I can plug in, say, a CD player or DVD player if I want to listen to music or play a movie in here. Then the number one unit is hooked to this Behringer multi-effects processor. Now, those of you who are following my videos, you saw this. I used this on the 725 to generate pitch shift. But in this case, I'm generating reverb with it. So the headphone output comes over here, plugs into the Behringer unit. I have it set to a nice, very saturated reverb sound. Remember that I don't have any reverb sound going back into the main audio. So in order to hear the reverb in proportion to that main audio, I have to make this very thick and saturated. And then I have just a regular PA type amplifier that I'm using to amplify that. There's a couple of bookshelf speakers. I'm going to put a couple of additional speakers in the back of the room. That way the reverb is a little more enveloping.